I never planned to be the skeleton in my family's closet. Standing outside my uncle's sprawling Victorian mansion in Seattle on a drizzly Thanksgiving evening in 2022, I watched raindrops roll down my designer umbrella and contemplated how drastically things might have unfolded if my family had given me even a shred of respect along the way. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elise Morgan, and I'm the founder and CEO of Nexus Communications, one of the fastest-growing tech communications firms on the West Coast. But to my family, I'm still just the directionless disappointment who walked away from a real job at my uncle's company 5 years ago to chase pipe dreams. The elegant holiday lights reflected in puddles across the cobblestone driveway as I recalled last year's Thanksgiving disaster. My cousin Blake had cornered me by the bar, martini in hand, MBA blazoned across his personality like a brand. "Still, doing that freelance thing?" he'd asked with practiced concern, as if I were selling handmade jewelry at farmers' markets. "Dad mentioned they need someone in the marketing department. Entry level, but it's a foot in the door." This, while Nexus had just closed a $2 million contract with the very streaming service his company was desperately trying to court. Morgan Media Enterprises had been my Uncle Richard's pride for 30 years. What began as a small radio station had evolved into a regional media conglomerate, with Richard's calculated ruthlessness driving every acquisition. My father, James Morgan, had followed his older brother into the business, forever settling for second in command, his creativity perpetually stifled beneath Richard's rigid vision. The festering resentment between them had shaped our family gatherings for as long as I could remember. "Success follows the blueprint," Uncle Richard would proclaim, raising his glass to Blake and my other cousin Vanessa, who had dutifully studied business, joined the family company, and proceeded to climb the ranks despite mediocre talents and uninspired ideas. I had chosen differently. After double majoring in communications and computer science at Stanford, I'd accepted a position at Morgan Media, believing naively that I could modernize my family's aging company from within. For 3 years, I'd pitched digital transformation strategies while watching the company hemorrhage relevance to more innovative competitors. When I finally resigned to launch my own venture, my father had looked at me with such profound disappointment that I still felt its weight. "You're walking away from your heritage," he'd said. What he didn't understand was that I was walking toward saving it, just not in the way they expected. So I built Nexus quietly, strategically. I avoided industry galas where I might encounter family. I published under E.J. Morgan rather than Elise. I hired the brightest minds my uncle had overlooked or undervalued. When Morgan Media began its inevitable decline in the streaming era, I positioned Nexus as the bridge between traditional media companies and emerging digital platforms. I became the solution to a problem my family didn't even realize they had created. Tonight, they would finally learn who owned Horizon Digital Partners, the mysterious tech investor they'd been courting for months. To my family, I was still just Elise, working from a converted warehouse space in Capitol Hill. They didn't know that warehouse now housed over 70 employees across 3 floors, or that the unassuming brick building had been featured in Seattle Business Monthly as tech's new power address. Since none of them had ever bothered to visit, the misconception persisted, undisturbed. I took a steadying breath and pressed the doorbell, the chimes echoing beyond the heavy mahogany door. My Aunt Catherine opened it, her face brightening momentarily, before settling into that familiar mixture of affection and concern. "Elise, darling, we weren't sure you'd make it." She embraced me briefly, then lowered her voice. "Your uncle's brought some investors tonight. Perhaps don't mention your business ventures." The foyer bustled with Thanksgiving opulence, crystal chandeliers, catered hors d'oeuvres, the practiced laughter of people accustomed to networking even during holidays. Media executives mingled with family members while Blake, predictably, held court by the fireplace, his fiancée Andrea at his side, nodding appreciatively at his every utterance. As Chief Marketing Officer at Morgan Media, a title earned through bloodline rather than talent, Blake had overseen 3 failed rebranding campaigns in as many years. Elise! My father appeared, champagne flute in hand, eyes already betraying the slight glassiness of someone on his 3rd drink. Come meet David Winters from Cascade Networks. They're expanding their content team. I smiled politely, suppressing the urge to mention that Cascade was actually one of my clients, their digital strategy entirely shaped by Nexus recommendations. My father still viewed me as a perpetual job seeker rather than an employer. Before I could respond, Uncle Richard entered the conversation, trailing 2 silver-haired board members, his booming voice carrying across the marble floors. These negotiations with Horizon are driving me insane. They've got us jumping through hoops like circus animals. I stiffened slightly. Horizon Digital Partners was my investment subsidiary, created specifically to acquire struggling traditional media companies for modernization. The hoops were intentional. I needed to assess just how willing my uncle was to embrace actual change before revealing myself. If we could just get a meeting with the elusive E.J. Morgan at Nexus Communications, one board member lamented. Apparently, their digital transformation protocols are revolutionary, but the CEO never takes meetings personally. I sipped, my champagne slowly hiding the smile threatening to emerge. They had no idea she was already in the room, wearing a green velvet dress and listening to their desperation firsthand. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Never heard of them, Uncle Richard dismissed, though the tightness around his eyes betrayed his lie. He'd heard of us. He just couldn't bear admitting any competitor's success. Besides, Morgan Media doesn't need outsiders telling us how to run our business. 30 years of success speaks for itself. I couldn't help myself. Does it, though? Your streaming numbers are down 40% year over year, while independent content creators are flourishing on the platforms you dismissed as fads 5 years ago. The room seemed to still. My uncle's champagne flute paused midway to his lips. My father's eyes widened in silent warning. My mother, perpetually conflict avoidant, suddenly found intense interest in her appetizer. Elise, my father cautioned sharply, but I continued, years of dismissed proposals and patronizing rejections fueling my words. The Morgan Media growth strategy relies on outdated distribution models. The partnership with Horizon isn't a forward-thinking initiative. It's a desperate lifeline because you've fallen a decade behind the digital transformation curve. Uncle Richard's complexion darkened dangerously. And what exactly would you know about media strategy or digital transformation? Your little freelance work handling social media for coffee shops hardly qualifies you to analyze a company with our pedigree. My father grasped my elbow firmly, steering me toward the kitchen with practiced smoothness. Once through the swinging door, his expression hardened. Have you completely lost your mind? That's the board of directors out there. I was only pointing out, you've always done this, he interrupted. Always thinking you know better than people with decades of experience. Your little tech company isn't Morgan Media. You don't understand the complexities. The kitchen door swung open as Blake entered, Andrea trailing behind him, their expressions a matching set of condescending concern. That was uncomfortable, Blake said, leaning against the marble counter. Maybe Elise should step out for some air. We don't want to jeopardize the Horizon negotiations with amateur analysis. My father's shoulders slumped slightly, the familiar capitulation to Richard's side of the family that had defined his career. He's right. Perhaps it's best if you go. Family disagreements are one thing, but this is business. I looked between them, my father's conflict-avoidant surrender, Blake's smug superiority, Andrea's practiced sympathy. 5 years of building in silence, of proving myself while they assumed I was failing. All culminating in being dismissed from a family dinner, like an unruly teenager. "Fine," I said quietly, collecting my coat and bag. "But remember this conversation tomorrow. Things will look very different in the morning." Blake chuckled. "What exactly do you think you're going to do?" I smiled, thinking of the acquisition. Documents waiting in my office safe, where Horizon Digital Partners offered to purchase controlling interest in Morgan Media, contingent upon a complete leadership restructuring. The documents awaited only my signature, or rather, the signature of E.J. Morgan, CEO of Nexus Communications and sole proprietor of Horizon Digital. "Happy Thanksgiving," I replied, stepping back into the rain. The next morning, I arrived at Nexus headquarters before dawn. The city was still dark, but our offices hummed with the quiet energy of a company that had outgrown expectations. "Good morning, Ms. Morgan," said Zoe, my executive assistant, handing me a perfectly prepared espresso. "The Morgan Media delegation is confirmed for 10 a.m. Your uncle has called twice already trying to reschedule for earlier." Only 3 people knew that E.J. Morgan and Elise Morgan were the same person, and today, that carefully maintained separation would collapse. Spectacularly, if you've ever been dismissed by those who should have valued your input most, hit subscribe now. The next part of this story demonstrates exactly how patient success becomes the most powerful response to years of underestimation. "Let them arrive at 9:45, but don't bring them up until exactly 10, I instructed, settling into my office. Unlike Morgan Media's dated wood-paneled headquarters, Nexus occupied a thoroughly renovated historical building. Open collaborative spaces flowed into private meeting areas. Living walls of native plants brought natural energy to technology. Hubs. Our conference room featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, with the snow-capped Olympic Mountains visible on clear days. This was my domain, not my aunt's formal dining room or my uncle's boardroom. Here, no one told. Me, I didn't understand the business I had built from nothing. "How many are coming?" I asked, reviewing the Horizon acquisition proposal once more. 7, Zoe replied. "Richard Morgan, 3 board members, the CFO." She paused, glancing at her tablet. "Your father and Blake as well." Of course Blake would insert himself. As chief marketing officer, he'd overseen the company's steadily declining relevance while blaming market forces rather than his own lack of innovation. I inhaled deeply, the echo of my father's disappointed voice from last night still reverberating in my memory. "Have legal standing by," I instructed, "and tell Marcus to prepare for immediate digital systems integration assessment." At 9:50, Zoe's voice came through the intercom. "They've arrived early, as expected." "Let them wait in the reception area until exactly 10 dark, I replied. "Then bring them to the main conference room." During those 10 minutes, I centered myself. 5 years of building in silence, of watching my family's company falter while mine flourished, of reading industry articles praising the mysterious E.J. Morgan while my relatives dismissed Elise over holiday dinners. The dual identity had served its purpose, allowing me to build without the weight of family expectations or interference, but maintaining it had become exhausting. At precisely 10:02 a.m., I watched through the glass wall as the Morgan Media delegation followed Zoe down the corridor. My uncle led the procession, his confident stride betraying no awareness of how thoroughly his perspective was about to shift. My father followed, his expression more reserved, uncertain. Blake trailed behind, eyes darting around, already assessing, and I suspected, dismissing our workspace as trendy rather than substantial. I straightened my blazer, a custom-tailored piece in Nexus's signature deep teal, and stepped into the conference room from my adjoining office. Their backs were to me as they took in the panoramic view of the city I'd chosen over their prescribed path. "Welcome to Nexus Communications," I said. They turned, expressions shifting from professional neutrality to shocked recognition. "Elise?" My father spoke first, confusion evident. "What are you doing here?" Uncle Richard's brow furrowed deeply. "There must be some mistake. We have a meeting with Elise Morgan, the CEO of Nexus and principal of Horizon Digital Partners." I moved calmly to the head of the conference table, taking the seat traditionally reserved for the highest authority in the room. "There's no mistake." I moved calmly to the head of the conference table, taking the seat traditionally reserved for the highest authority in the room. "There's no mistake. E.J. Morgan, Elise Jennifer Morgan. I am the founder and CEO of Nexus Communications and the sole proprietor of Horizon Digital Partners." The silence that followed was absolute. Blake's face drained of color. My father stared as though seeing me for the first time. The board members exchanged glances that mixed disbelief with dawning comprehension. Uncle Richard recovered first, his laugh sharp and dismissive. "This is absurd. Horizon controls over $300 million in technology assets. Nexus is valued at what? $80 million? You expect us to believe you built this without any support, or—" He trailed off, the impossibility of his niece's success finally confronting his deeply ingrained biases. "Zoe," I called, "please distribute the acquisition packages." My assistant entered with precisely prepared folders, placing one before each visitor. As they opened the documents, I watched realization spread across their faces. Inside, you'll find the complete terms of Horizon's offer for Morgan Media Enterprises, along with a detailed analysis of your company's market position, digital shortcomings, and proposed restructuring plan under Nexus management. I clicked a remote, activating the wall-mounted screens around us. Data visualizations illustrated Morgan Media's declining market share alongside Nexus's exponential growth. Your traditional advertising revenue has fallen by 57% over the past 4 years. Your digital conversion strategy has failed to generate sustainable income streams. Without this acquisition, Morgan Media faces bankruptcy within 18 months. Uncle Richard's face flushed deep crimson. "These projections are preposterous. These figures, this is confidential information. How did you access this?" "Nothing is confidential to me," I replied calmly. "Nexus has specialized in digital media analytics since its inception. We've been monitoring Morgan Media alongside all potential acquisition targets, and contrary to what you believed last night, we don't handle social media for coffee shops. We transform dying media companies into digital powerhouses." I paused, allowing another truth to surface. "We also acquired your debt through various holdings last year. Your bank's answer to us now?" Blake laughed nervously. "You can't possibly have the capital for this scale of operation. I raised initial funding by selling the Morgan Media stock options I received during my employment," I explained. "I invested early in 3 streaming platforms you dismissed as passing fads. When those companies went public, I leveraged those returns to acquire struggling traditional media outlets, modernize their operations, and sell them at substantial profits." The boardroom erupted into chaos. Uncle Richard shouted threats about family loyalty. The CFO frantically reviewed the financial disclosures, confirming their accuracy with visible dismay. My father remained silent, his expression unreadable. "This is absurd," Blake finally sputtered. "You can't expect us to believe you orchestrated all this." "I don't particularly care what you believe," I replied. "The facts speak for themselves. Morgan Media needs Horizon's investment to survive. I own Horizon. These are my terms." I nodded toward the acquisition documents. "First, complete leadership restructuring. The entire executive team will be replaced with Nexus-approved digital media specialists." "This is—" Uncle Richard began, but I continued without acknowledging his interruption. "Second, full technology integration. Your outdated systems will be replaced with our proprietary digital platforms. Third, content reorganization prioritizing streaming and interactive media over traditional broadcasting. You can't possibly expect us to accept these terms, one board member objected. I smiled. Your alternatives are limited. Reject the offer, and Horizon calls your outstanding loans. Morgan Media collapses within quarters. Accept it and we save what remains of my grandfather's legacy before your leadership destroys it completely. The room exploded again. Uncle Richard slammed his fist on the table, shouting about betrayal and legal consequences. Blake argued frantically with the CFO, who was already acknowledging the accuracy of our financial assessment. My father remained motionless, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Eventually, as the initial shock subsided into grudging recognition of reality, the room quieted. You planned this from the beginning, Uncle Richard said, his voice low. You used your position in the family to gather intelligence, then left to undermine us. I spent 3 years proposing digital transformation strategies that you rejected, I corrected. I didn't leave to undermine Morgan Media. I left to build something that worked. The fact that you now need what I built is simply the market, recognizing value. And what happens to the current leadership? Blake asked, his voice strained. Most will be evaluated for reassignment within the new organization, I replied. Those without relevant skills for our digital focus will receive standard severance packages. And family? My father asked quietly, breaking his silence. I met his gaze directly. Family members will be assessed like everyone else, based on merit and relevant expertise, not last names. As the board members conferred in hushed tones, recognizing the inevitability of our terms, my father approached me. Elise, could we speak privately? I nodded, leading him to my adjoining office. Once the door closed behind us, he stood, awkwardly, taking in the space that represented everything he thought I couldn't achieve. I don't understand, he said finally. Why the secrecy? Why not tell us what you were building? Would you have believed me? I asked simply. Or would you have dismissed it as another one of my impractical ideas? When I left Morgan Media, you told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. He flinched at the reminder. I was wrong, he admitted, the words clearly difficult. For him. But this deception, using a different name, creating shell companies to acquire our debt. Was that necessary? E.J. Morgan built this company without family connections or assumptions, I explained. No one dismissed her ideas. Because she was James Morgan's headstrong daughter, no one assumed she got meetings because of her last name. Her success is entirely her own. He nodded slowly, processing this. And now? Will you destroy everything your grandfather built out of spite? I'm saving what's worth saving, I corrected. The Morgan name and media, the core assets, the legacy. But the leadership that drove it into the ground? The outdated business model? Those don't deserve preservation. My father looked out the window at the Seattle skyline, the Space Needle visible through rain-spattered glass. Where do I fit in this new version of Morgan Media? The question hung between us, laden with years of missed opportunities. His failure to stand up to his brother, my decision to prove myself without his support. That depends, I replied carefully. Do you want a title preserved out of family obligation? Or are you finally ready to contribute the creative vision you've suppressed for 30 years trying to please Richard? He turned back to me, surprise, evident in his expression. You knew about that? Of course I knew. Your original programming concepts that Uncle Richard rejected? They're exactly what's succeeding in digital markets now. Your instincts were always better than his business sense. For the first time in years, I saw something like hope in my father's eyes. Not the resigned acceptance that had defined his relationship with the family business, but genuine possibility. The acquisition documents need signatures, I said, returning us to the immediate reality. The board is likely ready to move forward, with or without Richard's approval. We returned to the conference room, where the atmosphere had shifted from outrage to pragmatic resignation. The board members had done the math and recognized the truth in my assessment. Uncle Richard stood isolated, his authority already diminishing in real time. "We're prepared to accept the terms," the lead board member announced, "contingent upon certain leadership transition details." "Traitors," Richard muttered, but without conviction. The game was over, and he knew it. As the ink dried on preliminary agreements, I stood at the window, watching Seattle's persistent rain transform the city into a watercolor of grays and greens. Behind me, the board members filed out, their world fundamentally altered within the span of a 90-minute meeting. Only my father lingered. "Elise," he began, hesitation evident in his voice, "I'd like to understand more about your vision." "We'll have time for that," I replied. "Next week, once the dust settles." He nodded, and in his eyes I saw something I'd never witnessed before: respect. Genuine, earned respect, not the obligatory acknowledgement reserved for family pleasantries. As the door closed behind him, Zoe entered with a steaming mug of tea. "Congratulations," she said, setting it on my desk. "Though I suspect this is just the beginning." She was right. The acquisition was only the first step. The true challenge would come in transforming Morgan Media from within, in proving that my vision wasn't just about reclaiming family recognition, but about creating something genuinely valuable. Success wasn't measured in shocked expressions around a conference table. It was built in the quiet, consistent work that would follow this dramatic reveal. Within hours, industry blogs began reporting rumors of a major acquisition. By the following morning, the business press had caught wind of the story. Mystery Tech CEO E.J. Morgan revealed as Elise Morgan in family media takeover. The headline stared back at me from my tablet screen as I sat in my home office, overlooking Elliott Bay. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the meeting. Distant relatives suddenly remembered my existence. Former colleagues expressed belated support for my entrepreneurial spirit. Even Blake had sent 3 messages, each more desperate than the last, inquiring about his future role. I left them, all unanswered. Only one message received my attention, a simple text from Sophie, my youngest cousin, Uncle Richard's daughter who'd just graduated from film school against her father's wishes. "You actually did it. You showed them all. Can we talk sometime?" I smiled and typed a response. "Tuesday, 3 p.m., my office." The weekend passed in a flurry of preparation. My legal team finalized acquisition details. HR developed integration protocols. Technology. Specialists prepared for systems migration. By Monday morning, when I arrived at Nexus headquarters, a small group of reporters had gathered outside. "Ms. Morgan," one called as I approached the entrance, "is it true you created Horizon specifically to acquire your family's company?" "No comment at this time," I replied, maintaining my composure. "A formal statement will be issued later this week." Inside, my executive team awaited in the conference room, screens filled with integration timelines and transition strategies. "The media narrative is intense," Marcus, my chief strategy officer, noted. "They're framing it as a revenge takeover." "Let them," I replied, setting down my bag. "The market will judge us by results, not rumors." "Morgan Media's executive team is requesting an emergency meeting this afternoon," Zoe added. "Your uncle is demanding to renegotiate terms." I shook my head. The terms were clear. The board has approved them. Richard no longer drives this conversation. "And your father?" Marcus asked carefully. "He's invited to tomorrow's strategy session," I replied. "His creative insight will be valuable during content restructuring." For years, I'd watched my father's ideas die in Richard's boardroom. Innovative programming concepts, digital distribution models, interactive storytelling platforms. Now, those same ideas would form the foundation of Morgan Media's resurrection. The afternoon brought a parade of Morgan Media department heads to Nexus, each clutching portfolios of projects and initiatives, suddenly eager to demonstrate their digital savvy. I met with each briefly, assessing not just their technical knowledge, but their adaptability. In the transformed company I envisioned, willingness to evolve mattered more than past achievements. By evening, when I finally returned to my office, exhaustion threatened to overcome me. The adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, replaced by the sobering reality of the work ahead. I stood at the window, watching lights flicker across the city as darkness settled over Seattle. "You've created quite the storm," came a voice from the doorway. I turned to find Vanessa, my other cousin, Blake's older sister, who'd left Morgan Media years earlier to pursue a career in tech journalism. She leaned against the doorframe, studying me with newfound curiosity. "Security didn't mention you. We're here," I observed. She smiled. "I have an appointment with E.J. Morgan for an exclusive interview." "I'm not giving interviews yet. Not even to family?" She stepped into the office. Especially not when that family member was the first to write about Nexus's innovative approach to digital transformation, before anyone knew who was behind it. I remembered the article from 2 years earlier. The first major press Nexus had received an insightful analysis of our business model published in Tech Vanguard. I hadn't connected it to Vanessa at the time. "You knew," I realized. She shrugged. "I suspected. The strategic approach was too similar to ideas you used to pitch at family dinners while everyone ignored you." "You knew," I realized, staring at Vanessa with newfound appreciation. She leaned against my desk, casual yet purposeful. "I recognized your strategic fingerprints. The way you integrate technology and content isn't just innovative, it's exactly what you described at that Christmas dinner 4 years ago, while everyone mocked your naive understanding of media economics. And you didn't say anything. Some revolutions deserve their dramatic moment." She smiled. "Besides, I left Morgan Media because I saw the same problems you did. Richard mistook tradition for strategy. Blake confused nepotism with talent. I studied my cousin, realizing we had more in common than I'd ever acknowledged. Why journalism? You could have started your own venture." "Not everyone builds empires, Elise. Some of us document them." She handed me a sleek tablet. "I've drafted the exclusive story of Nexus and its visionary founder. No revenge angle, no family drama. Just the business innovation that financial markets should be paying attention to." The headline read, "Digital Visionary E.J. Morgan Reveals Path to Media Evolution." The article detailed Nexus's revolutionary integration strategies and forward-thinking content approaches without a single mention of family rejection. "This isn't the story they're expecting," I noted. "That's precisely why it matters. Success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about advancing an industry that desperately needs evolution." She took back the tablet. "I'll hold it for your approval. Your story deserves to be about vision, not vengeance." After Vanessa left, I remained at the window, watching Seattle transform in the evening light. The narrative was shifting beneath my feet, from the satisfying drama of family comeuppance to the more complex reality of industry transformation. Perhaps that was the more important story anyway. My phone chimed with a message from Marcus. "Preliminary integration team reports complete. Morgan Media infrastructure worse than projected. Meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. to review." The real work was only beginning. The dramatic revelation might have been satisfying, but the true test would come in the months ahead. Could I transform a struggling legacy company into a digital powerhouse? Could I prove that my vision extended beyond simply showing up my family? The next morning, I arrived at Nexus headquarters before sunrise. Seattle's perpetual rain had paused, leaving the city gleaming in rare early sunlight. I found Marcus, already in the conference room, surrounded by digital screens displaying Morgan Media's technical infrastructure diagrams. "It's like discovering your grandparents are still using dial-up," he said, scrolling through systems assessments. "Their content management systems are a decade outdated. Data silos everywhere. 3 separate, incompatible audience analytics platforms." "And the talent?" I asked, pouring myself coffee. "Mixed. Some brilliant people buried under bureaucracy. Others coasting on connections." He pulled up a series of organizational charts. "Your cousin Blake created a marketing department with 17 vice presidents and no clear objectives." I wasn't surprised. "Identify the innovative thinkers worth keeping. We need to move quickly." "Already started. I've marked 30 key personnel for retention and leadership roles." Marcus highlighted profiles across the screens, including some surprising ones. He expanded a file labeled Content Innovation. "This team has been developing interactive media concepts for 3 years, all rejected by upper management, but their prototypes are revolutionary. Led by someone named Daniel Chen." I froze. "Daniel Chen? Early 40s? Background in digital storytelling?" Marcus nodded. "Hired 5 years ago from a startup that Richard Morgan acquired, then dismantled. His team works in a converted storage space in the basement, literally underground." "He was my mentor," I said quietly. "When I first joined Morgan Media, Daniel showed me how digital transformation could work. Richard transferred him to special projects after he supported my content proposals. Well, his special project has developed a content personalization engine that's years ahead of competitors, but it's never been implemented." I smiled, the first piece of my transformation strategy falling into place. "Schedule a meeting with Daniel and his team for this afternoon. Their technology will become the centerpiece of our integration." By noon, my father arrived for his scheduled strategy session. He entered my office with newfound hesitation, the confident executive persona replaced by something more authentic, a creative thinker who had spent decades suppressing his best ideas. "You've created quite the storm," he said, choosing the same words Vanessa had used the previous day. "Storms clear the air," I replied, offering him a seat. "I need your insight on content direction." He seemed surprised by my directness. "You already have a vision. You've built all this without my input." "I built Nexus based on what was missing at Morgan Media," I corrected. "But transforming Morgan requires understanding what made it great in the first place, before Richard redirected everything toward traditional broadcasting." My father's expression shifted as he realized I wasn't dismissing the company's legacy, merely its recent leadership. For the next 2 hours, we discussed the original Morgan Media vision, my grandfather's commitment to innovative storytelling, the community-focused programming that had built audience loyalty, the creative risks that established the brand. "Your wavelength platform," I said, pulling up designs from his rejected proposals. "Interactive content that adapts to viewer engagement patterns." Richard called it unnecessarily complex, but it's exactly what audiences want now. "You kept these?" he asked, surprised to see his concepts preserved in my files. "I keep everything valuable," I replied simply. "The wavelength architecture will be the foundation for our new integrated media approach." For the first time in our complicated relationship, I saw my father engage without defensiveness or reservation. The creative thinker emerged from behind. Decades of compromise, his ideas flowing with remarkable clarity. By the time Daniel and his innovation team arrived, my father was sketching content architectures on the conference room smartboard with renewed energy. The meeting that followed transformed the acquisition from concept to vision. Daniel's team presented their underground innovations, personalization engines, interactive storytelling platforms, community-building features, all developed in secret, while the company's leadership remained focused on traditional broadcasting. My father's content frameworks provided the strategic structure these technologies needed. My Nexus integration specialists identified implementation pathways. "This is why you came back," Daniel said quietly to me as the meeting concluded. "You saw what was still possible here." "I saw what was being wasted," I corrected. "Talent, like yours. Vision like my father's. A legacy worth saving, if not the leadership that was destroying it." That evening, as teams dispersed to begin detailed integration planning, my father lingered. "This wasn't what I expected," he admitted. "What did you expect?" "Dismantling, revenge." He gestured to the plans spread across the conference table. "Not Renaissance." "Revenge is short-sighted," I replied. "Building something lasting matters more." He nodded, something like pride flickering across his features. "Your grandfather would have recognized that philosophy. He built Morgan Media to elevate voices, not silence them." As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I wish I'd stood up to Richard years ago. Supported your ideas when you first presented them." "We can't change the past," I said. "But we're redirecting the future. That's what matters now." The weeks that followed brought intense transformation. Morgan Media's headquarters became a hive of activity as Nexus teams integrated systems, restructured departments, and identified talent for leadership roles. The corporate culture shock was palpable. Richard's rigid hierarchy replaced by collaborative innovation frameworks. Blake's bureaucratic marketing machine streamlined into agile content teams. Not everyone embraced the change. Several executives resigned rather than adapt to new leadership structures. Others struggled with the technological learning curve required. Blake himself launched a brief, unsuccessful attempt to rally board members against the acquisition before accepting a generous severance package. Richard proved more problematic. 3 weeks after the acquisition, my uncle called an impromptu press conference announcing his plans to challenge the deal through litigation, claiming I had exploited confidential information gained during my employment. "He's desperate," Marcus observed as we watched the broadcast from my office. The legal team vetted every aspect of this acquisition. "It's not about winning a lawsuit," I replied. "It's about controlling the narrative." That evening, I received an unexpected visitor. My Aunt Catherine, Richard's wife, Blake, and Sophie's mother, appeared at Nexus headquarters unannounced. Zoe showed her into my office with raised eyebrows. "This is quite impressive," she said, looking around the space that represented everything her husband had dismissed. "Though I shouldn't be surprised. You always were the clearest thinker in the family." "Thank you for saying so," I replied, cautiously, though I don't recall anyone expressing that sentiment before. She smiled sadly. "That's fair. Family dinners weren't exactly forums for honest assessment." She set her purse on the chair across from me. "I'm here about Richard's lawsuit. I need you to understand something." "I'm listening." "It's not about business. Not really." She sighed deeply. 30 years ago, your father developed a revolutionary programming concept. Richard took credit for it, built his early reputation on it. Your father never challenged him, said family harmony mattered more than recognition. I absorbed this revelation, pieces of family history rearranging themselves. When you presented similar innovations 3 years ago, Richard didn't just see competition, she continued. He saw history repeating, another generation of Morgan creativity threatening his carefully constructed image. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm tired of watching talent suppressed for ego. Sophie is already flourishing under your leadership. Even Blake might find his actual skills once he stops trying to be his father." She straightened her shoulders. "I've told Richard to drop the lawsuit. The family has lost enough creative potential to his insecurity." After she left, I sat with this new understanding of our family dynamics. The acquisition wasn't just transforming a company, it was unraveling decades of suppressed potential and misdirected talent. The following morning, I received notification that Richard had withdrawn his legal challenge. By afternoon, industry publications were reporting his departure to a consulting role with a former competitor, a face-saving exit that everyone recognized as retreat. 6 weeks into the integration, I scheduled a company-wide meeting at Morgan Media headquarters. Over 500 employees gathered in the main auditorium. Nexus team members intermingled with Morgan Media staff, the distinction between them already blurring as collaborative projects took shape. Transformation isn't about erasing history, I began, standing on the stage where Richard had once dismissed my ideas in front of the entire executive team. It's about honoring what works while evolving what doesn't. I gestured to the screens behind me, displaying the newly integrated Nexus Morgan platforms. In 3 months, we'll launch the most advanced interactive media ecosystem in the industry, built on Morgan Media's storytelling legacy and Nexus's technological innovation. Not a takeover, but a fusion. As I outlined the implementation timeline, I noted my father in the front row, engaged and focused in a way I'd never witnessed during Richard's leadership. Beside him sat Daniel and his innovation team, now elevated from basement obscurity to central roles in the company's future. Sophie had taken charge of a new division focused on next-generation interactive documentaries. Even Vanessa had agreed to lead our revitalized journalism division, bringing her technical understanding and editorial integrity to an area Richard had systematically defunded. Success isn't built in boardroom confrontations, I concluded. It's created through consistent innovation, collaborative thinking. Success isn't built in boardroom confrontations, I concluded my address to the company. It's created through consistent innovation, collaborative thinking, and the courage to challenge assumptions. That's the foundation we're building together. Not just a merged company, but a new model for what media can become. As the auditorium filled with applause, genuine enthusiasm, not the obligatory corporate acknowledgement I'd witnessed throughout my career, I felt a profound shift in momentum. The dramatic revelation of my identity as E.J. Morgan had captured headlines. But this quieter transformation would create lasting impact. 1 year after the acquisition, I stood on the rooftop garden of our new headquarters, a renovated historic building in downtown Seattle that combined Morgan Media's broadcast facilities with Nexus's digital innovation spaces. The city stretched. Before me, mountains visible in the distance beneath an uncharacteristically clear sky. Quarterly projections exceed targets by 32%, Marcus reported, joining me by the railing. The Wavelength platform has transformed our audience engagement metrics. Daniel's team is already developing the next-generation personalization engine. I nodded, satisfaction warming me more effectively than the spring sunshine. And the regional partnerships? Expanding faster than projected. Blake's initiative has signed 17 local media organizations across the Pacific Northwest. The shared technology framework is revolutionizing community journalism. The mention of my cousin still surprised me. Blake had transformed more dramatically than anyone anticipated. Stripped of executive privilege and forced to build on merit, he'd discovered an unexpected talent for connecting with regional media partners. Without the pressure to emulate Richard's domineering style, he'd developed a collaborative approach that created genuine value. The New York expansion plans are ready for review, Marcus continued. The East Coast market is hungry for our integrated model. I smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought us here. Schedule the leadership team for tomorrow. It's time to accelerate. That evening, I hosted a small dinner at my home overlooking Elliott Bay. Not a corporate gathering, but something more meaningful, a family reconfiguration. My father arrived first, bringing wine from a small vineyard he'd discovered during his recent travels. For the first time in my memory, he moved with the easy confidence of someone at peace with his choices. The creative content division numbers are impressive, he said as we stood on the balcony watching ferries cross the Sound. The documentary series has already been nominated for 3 industry awards. Your wavelength framework made it possible, I acknowledged. The interactive storytelling architecture you designed 30 years ago just needed today's technology to fully realize its potential. Since the acquisition, my father had flourished leading the creative content division, finally implementing the visionary approaches Richard had systematically suppressed. The transformation in his demeanor was even more remarkable than the business metrics. Decades of resignation replaced by genuine enthusiasm. Sophie arrived next, vibrant with energy from her leadership role in the innovation lab. In the year since the acquisition, my youngest cousin had blossomed from a hesitant film school graduate into a confident creative director, her interactive documentary platform revolutionizing how audiences engaged with factual content. The university partnership is official, she announced, accepting a glass of wine. Stanford's Media Innovation Center wants to collaborate on educational applications for our interactive frameworks. They're calling it the future of knowledge transmission. Blake and Vanessa arrived together, a previously unimaginable reconciliation between siblings who had once represented opposite responses to Richard's leadership. Blake had embraced his role in regional partnerships with unexpected humility, while Vanessa's journalism division had restored Morgan Media's reputation for editorial integrity. As we gathered around the table, I observed the transformation before me, not just a business success, but a family renaissance. The dynamics that had once suppressed creativity now nurtured it. The hierarchy that had privileged loyalty over talent had given way to a meritocracy that elevated both. I've been thinking about grandfather lately, my father said as we finished dinner, how he would view what we've built together. He was an innovator in his time, I reflected. Started with radio when everyone said newspapers couldn't be challenged. Moved into regional television when the big networks dismissed local markets. He believed media should serve community needs, not just corporate interests, my father continued. Somewhere along the way, under Richard's leadership, that vision narrowed. And now? Sophie asked. Now, I replied, we're expanding it again. Not just in technology or market reach, but in purpose. Creating platforms where diverse voices thrive, where innovation isn't threatening, but essential. As the evening concluded and my family departed, so different from the dismissive relatives who had ejected me from Thanksgiving dinner, I stood again on the balcony, watching Seattle's lights shimmer across the water. The satisfaction I felt wasn't about vindication, though the dramatic boardroom reveal had certainly provided that. It was about creation, building something valuable from the ruins of what had been squandered. The next morning, I received news that transformed our company trajectory once again. Marcus appeared in my office doorway, tablet in hand, excitement evident in his typically composed demeanor. The Global Vision merger rumors were accurate, he announced. They're seeking a partnership. Their international distribution network, combined with our integrated content platforms, would create unprecedented reach. Global Vision represented exactly what we needed: worldwide distribution channels to expand our innovative content approaches beyond regional markets. The merger would accelerate our growth trajectory by years. Their CEO wants to meet directly, Marcus continued. No intermediaries, just principals. When? Tomorrow. Their corporate jet is already scheduled to land in Seattle at 9 a.m. I nodded, already calculating strategic approaches. Prepare the comprehensive overview. Full transparency on integration models, technology roadmaps, and expansion projections. If they're serious about merger rather than acquisition, they deserve complete insight. The following morning, I arrived at our headquarters earlier than usual, reviewing merger scenarios and partnership structures. Global Vision's CEO, Elise Morgan, had built an impressive international media distribution network, but struggled with original content development, precisely the strength we had cultivated through our Morgan Nexus integration. At precisely 10 a.m., Zoe announced their arrival. I straightened my blazer and centered myself, preparing for the high-stakes negotiation ahead. The door opened to reveal a striking woman in her 50s, silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant knot, accompanied by her executive team. "E.J. Morgan," she said with a slight smile. "Or should I say Elise? Your revelation caused quite the stir in media circles." "Either is fine," I replied, extending my hand, though most people still use EJ professionally. "I'm not most people," she noted, taking the offered seat. "I've been following your career with interest, first at Morgan Media, then your departure, and now this remarkable transformation you've engineered." Something in her tone suggested more than casual industry awareness. I studied her more carefully. "You seem unusually familiar with my journey." She laughed, a warm sound devoid of corporate artifice. "I should be. I tried to hire you 3 years ago, after reading your rejected digital transformation proposal that Richard Morgan dismissed. My talent scout identified you as exactly the innovative thinker Global Vision needed." I froze, memories rearranging themselves. "The mysterious job offer that came after my resignation, that was from you?" "Indeed, but you declined without even taking the meeting, started Nexus instead." She gestured around at the headquarters we occupied. Clearly the right decision, as it turned out. For the next 2 hours, we discussed potential merger structures, integration frameworks, and expanded market opportunities. Unlike typical corporate negotiations focused on control and dominance, our conversation centered on value creation and complementary strengths. "Your content innovation paired with our global distribution creates something neither company could achieve independently," Alicia observed as we reviewed potential synergies. "The question isn't whether this merger makes sense, but how we structure it to preserve what makes both organizations effective." By afternoon, when her team departed with preliminary framework agreements, I remained in the conference room, processing the unexpected connection that had emerged. Alicia lingered as her executives filed out. "You know," she said conversationally, "I started my career at one of Richard Morgan's early acquisitions, Central Broadcasting in Portland." "I didn't realize that connection," I replied, suddenly alert. "I was a program director with some innovative ideas about audience engagement. Your uncle dismantled the entire division, called my concepts unnecessarily complicated." Her expression remained neutral, but I detected the echo of old wounds. "I left rather than accept a diminished role, built Global Vision from nothing. The parallel to my own journey was unmistakable. And now you're discussing a merger with the company that rejected you." "No," she corrected gently. "I'm discussing a merger with the woman who transformed that company into something worthy of partnership. There's a significant difference." After she departed, I sat with this new perspective, the realization that my story wasn't unique, but part of a larger pattern of innovation initially rejected, only to eventually reshape the very industries that dismissed it. The cycle of disruption wasn't just about technology, but about perspective, seeing possibilities where others perceived only threats. That evening, as I reviewed the preliminary merger documents, my phone chimed with an unexpected notification, a message from Richard, the first communication since his failed legal challenge and subsequent retreat from the industry. "Considering the Global Vision merger?" His text read, "Alicia Renner cannot be trusted. She's harbored resentment since I restructured Central Broadcasting decades ago. Don't let personal vindication cloud business judgment." I smiled at the irony, Richard warning about someone else's potential for vindictiveness, still unable to recognize the projection in his assessment. I drafted a simple reply. "Due diligence complete. Merger proceeds based on complementary strengths, not past grievances. That's the difference that matters." 6 weeks later, the Global Vision merger announcement transformed our market position overnight. Our stock value increased by 47%, as investors recognized the powerful combination of innovative content platforms and international distribution networks. Industry publications heralded the partnership as a new model for media integration in the digital age. The day after the public announcement, I found myself addressing the combined leadership teams, over 100 executives from 3 previously separate companies, now united under a shared vision. The auditorium hummed with anticipation and, inevitably, anxiety about the changes ahead. Transformation is never merely technical, I began, eschewing traditional corporate platitudes. Systems integration and organizational restructuring are important, certainly. But the true challenge and opportunity lies in cultural evolution. I gestured to the screens behind me, displaying not just organizational charts or growth projections, but examples of the innovative content already emerging from our previous integration. Morgan Media once represented tradition resistant to change. Nexus embodied disruption, challenging that tradition. Neither approach alone would have created what we've built together, a platform where established storytelling excellence merges with technological innovation to reach audiences in unprecedented ways. As I outlined the integration roadmap, I noted the diverse leadership assembled before me. Morgan Media veterans who had embraced transformation, Nexus innovators who had learned to value institutional knowledge, and now Global Vision's international perspective. Not a monolithic corporate culture, but a deliberate fusion of complementary strengths. The easy path is homogeneity, I concluded. Creating organizations where everyone thinks alike, approaches problems identically. The valuable path is integration, preserving diverse perspectives while uniting them toward shared purpose. That's the market advantage no competitor can easily replicate. The response wasn't universal enthusiasm. Transformation never receives unanimous support, but the energy in the room reflected genuine engagement rather than obligatory corporate compliance. People lingered afterward, forming spontaneous discussion groups around implementation challenges and creative possibilities. "You've changed the conversation again," my father observed, joining me as the crowd dispersed. A year ago, they were debating survival. 6 months ago, growth potential. Now they're envisioning industry transformation. "That's what leadership provides," I replied. "Context for contribution when change creates uncertainty." The following year brought intense challenges as we integrated Global Vision's international operations with our content innovation platforms. Cultural differences between Seattle-based teams and overseas divisions created inevitable friction. Technical systems designed for different regulatory environments required complex harmonization. Leadership styles varied dramatically across regions. But transformation took root, nurtured by the deliberate integration framework we had established. Global Vision's international teams embraced our content personalization engines while teaching us to adapt messaging for diverse cultural contexts. Our technology divisions developed modified platforms that maintained innovation while respecting regional requirements. 18 months after the initial Morgan Media acquisition, I found myself in London for the launch of our European headquarters. The renovated historic building in Covent Garden symbolized our approach, preserving architectural heritage while installing cutting-edge technology infrastructure within. As I toured the facility with Alicia, who now led our international division, the contrast with Morgan Media's stagnation under Richard's leadership couldn't have been more profound. Creative teams collaborated in open workspaces. Technology specialists demonstrated personalization engines adapted for European privacy regulations. Content developers pitched interactive documentaries exploring complex regional issues. "You've created something remarkable," Alicia observed as we watched a demonstration of the next-generation wavelength platform in our London headquarters. "Not just a successful company, but a model for transformation itself." I smiled, acknowledging both the compliment and its limitations. "We've created it together." Each stage of integration has contributed essential elements that would have been impossible in isolation. Standing in that gleaming London office, Watching teams from 3 previously separate companies collaborate seamlessly, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment deeper than any boardroom revelation could provide. The dramatic moment when I revealed myself as E.J. Morgan had lasted minutes. The meaningful work of transformation continued daily, creating impact far beyond personal vindication. 5 years after that fateful Thanksgiving dinner, where my family dismissed me, I found myself preparing for a very different kind of gathering. The World Economic Forum had invited me to deliver the keynote address on media evolution in the digital era, recognition not of a dramatic corporate takeover, but of the sustainable transformation model we had pioneered. The journey from that rainy Seattle evening to the global stage in Davos represented more than business success. It embodied a fundamental shift in perspective, from proving critics wrong to proving a vision right, from reaction against dismissal to creation beyond expectation. My presentation team had assembled compelling visuals demonstrating our growth trajectory, subscription metrics across continents, engagement patterns across demographics, innovative content formats across platforms. But as I reviewed the materials in my Davos hotel suite, something felt incomplete. "These metrics are impressive," I told Marcus, who had become my trusted strategic partner throughout our expansion. "But they don't capture the human transformation that made them possible." "What do you mean?" he asked, setting aside the projections. Daniel Chen, leading our technology division after years buried in Richard's basement. Sophie pioneering. Interactive documentaries after being told film school was a waste. Blake finding his authentic leadership style once freed from imitating Richard. My father implementing the wavelength framework decades after its initial rejection. I gestured toward the presentation. Those human evolutions created these corporate results, not the other way around. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. So we need to reframe the narrative, not just what we built, but how and why the integration approach enabled it. The revised presentation took shape over the next hours, transcending typical corporate metrics to capture the philosophical framework that had guided our success. Preserving valuable tradition while embracing necessary evolution, integrating diverse strengths rather than imposing uniform approaches, elevating contribution over hierarchy. The following morning, as I prepared to address global leaders and media influencers, I received an unexpected message. A simple text from Richard, my first communication from him in nearly 3 years. "Saw you're speaking at Davos. The Morgan. Name has never reached such prominence. Well done." The acknowledgement was characteristically self-referential, pride in the family name rather than recognition of my vision, but represented a profound shift from the dismissal and hostility that had followed our acquisition. Even Richard eventually had been forced to acknowledge the value we had created. I sent a brief reply. "Thank you. The legacy continues, just differently than expected." As I took the stage before the assembled global leaders, economic experts, and media executives, I thought about the journey from dismissal to recognition, not just my personal path but the broader pattern it represented. Transformation is often framed as replacement, I began, eschewing the expected corporate success narrative. New technologies displacing established systems, disruptive startups defeating industry incumbents, digital innovation conquering traditional approaches. This confrontational framework creates artificial barriers to meaningful evolution. The screens behind me displayed not just our company's impressive metrics, but the human transformations that had made them possible. Side-by-side images of teams and individuals before and after our integration, their potential unleashed through deliberate cultural restructuring. Morgan Media possessed irreplaceable assets, storytelling expertise, audience trust, and institutional knowledge built over decades. But under leadership resistant to change, those assets were depreciating rapidly. Nexus developed technological innovations that created new possibilities, but lacked the established credibility to maximize impact. Global Vision built international distribution networks, but struggled with content development. I gestured to the integration visuals displaying our current operations across continents. The true innovation wasn't technological, but philosophical, recognizing that neither tradition nor disruption alone creates sustainable value. The future belongs to organizations that integrate both, preserving what remains relevant while evolving what has become outdated. Throughout the presentation, I emphasized the human dimension of transformation, not just systems integration or organizational restructuring, but cultural evolution that allowed individuals to contribute their authentic strengths rather than conform to hierarchical expectations. The metrics that matter aren't just financial performance or market penetration, I concluded. They're human potential unleashed, creativity amplified, and purpose aligned with contribution. That's how sustainable transformation differs from temporary disruption. The standing ovation that followed reflected recognition beyond corporate success, acknowledgement of a philosophical approach that transcended typical business narratives. But the response that mattered most came later, during the private reception for keynote speakers. Your framework challenges prevailing assumptions, noted Dr. Eliana Vaziri, the renowned economist whose work on sustainable business models had influenced my thinking. Most corporate transformations emphasize technical integration while neglecting cultural evolution. Your approach reverses that priority. Technical systems are ultimately tools, I replied. Cultural frameworks determine how effectively those tools are utilized. What's most striking, she continued, is your emphasis on integration rather than replacement. Most disruptive innovations seek to eliminate predecessors rather than evolve alongside them. Elimination creates temporary advantage, I acknowledged. Integration builds sustainable ecosystems. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversation with media executives facing similar challenges, traditional organizations struggling with digital transformation, innovative startups seeking established credibility, international operations navigating cultural complexity. Our integration model offered a framework transcending these false dichotomies. When I returned to our London headquarters the following week, I found the European leadership team gathered to welcome me, not with corporate formality, but with genuine enthusiasm. The Davos presentation had been live-streamed throughout our global offices, creating renewed momentum for our expansion initiatives. Your keynote perfectly captured what makes our approach different, said Elise Harlow, who led our European content division after transitioning from traditional broadcasting to digital innovation. It's given us language to explain why integration matters more than disruption. In the months that followed, our transformation model gained recognition beyond our own operations. Industry publications analyzed our approach as a case study in sustainable evolution. Business schools developed curricula examining our integration framework. Struggling media organizations consulted with our teams to implement similar transformations. 6 years after the acquisition, I received an invitation that brought our journey full circle, the Morgan Media Lifetime Achievement Award, established by my grandfather to recognize individuals who transformed the industry landscape. The irony wasn't lost on me. Being honored by the very company I had acquired after being dismissed from their ranks. The ceremony would be held at the historic Olympia Theater in Seattle, gathering media executives from across the global industry. As I prepared my acceptance speech, I reflected on the elements that had truly driven our success. Not the dramatic acquisition of my family's company, though that had established our initial market position. Not the Global Vision merger, though, that had expanded our international reach. Not even the technological innovations we had pioneered, though those had differentiated our content approaches. The true catalyst had been something more fundamental, the courage to envision possibilities others dismissed, then the persistence to transform that vision into reality, despite inevitable resistance. Innovation wasn't primarily about technology, but perspective. Seeing opportunities where others perceived only threats, recognizing value where others noted only tradition. The evening of the ceremony, I arrived at the theater to find it transformed. The historic venue updated with subtle technology enhancements that maintained its architectural integrity while enabling contemporary capabilities. The metaphor wasn't accidental. This deliberate balance between heritage and innovation perfectly embodied our transformation philosophy. In the reception area, I encountered faces from every stage of our journey. Morgan media veterans who had embraced digital transformation, Nexus innovators who had learned to value institutional knowledge, global vision executives who had integrated international perspective. My transformed family circulated among them, my father proudly leading discussions about content innovation, Sophie demonstrating interactive documentary frameworks, Blake explaining regional partnership strategies. Even more meaningful were the unexpected reconnections. Daniel Chen and his daughter Layla, whose basement innovations had become cornerstone technologies. Thomas Winters, Richard's former deputy, who now consulted on digital transformation. Younger employees who had joined during our integration phases and grown into leadership roles. Most surprisingly, Catherine appeared at my elbow as I surveyed the gathering. "Quite a different scene from that Thanksgiving dinner," she observed with quiet satisfaction. "In every possible way," I agreed. "Richard asked me to give you something," she said, handing me a small envelope. "He's not well enough to attend but wanted you to have this before your speech." Inside, I found a brief handwritten note on Richard's personal stationery. "You've proven your grandfather's philosophy correct. Innovation matters more than tradition, vision more than control. The company is better in your hands than it ever was in mine. Congratulations on building what I couldn't recognize was necessary." The acknowledgement wasn't effusive or emotional. Richard remained Richard, even in retreat, but represented profound recognition from the man who had most actively dismissed my potential. Not approval seeking validation, but vindication transformed into legacy. As I took the stage to accept the award, the theater filled with executives and innovators from across the media landscape, competitors and partners, traditional broadcasters, and digital disruptors, content creators and distribution specialists. Their presence reflected recognition beyond corporate success to philosophical approach. "Transformation is often mistaken for replacement," I began, echoing themes from my Davos keynote but with deeper personal resonance. New displacing old, digital conquering analog, innovation eliminating tradition. This confrontational framework creates false choices that limit meaningful evolution. I gestured to the theater around us. A century-old architectural masterpiece subtly enhanced with contemporary technology. "Look at this venue. Its heritage preserved while its capabilities evolve." That's the philosophy that guided our approach to media transformation. Not erasing history, but extending it. Not dismissing tradition, but evolving it toward continued relevance. Throughout the address, I emphasized the human dimension of transformation, not just technological integration or organizational restructuring, but cultural evolution that unleashed potential previously constrained by hierarchical thinking. Morgan Media possessed irreplaceable strengths: storytelling expertise, audience trust, institutional knowledge. But those assets were depreciating under leadership resistant to necessary evolution. Nexus created technological innovations that opened new possibilities but lacked established audience relationships. Global Vision built international distribution, but struggled with content development. None of us alone could create what we've built together. As I concluded, I directed attention not to our impressive metrics, but to the people who had made them possible. Individuals whose talents had flourished when artificial constraints were removed, whose contributions had multiplied when aligned with authentic purpose. The most valuable transformation isn't reflected in balance sheets or market valuations, I noted. It lives in human potential unlocked, in creativity amplified, in purpose aligned with contribution. That's the legacy worth preserving and extending, not Static tradition, but continuous evolution guided by enduring values. The standing ovation that followed reflected recognition of a journey come full circle, from the dismissed family member to industry visionary, from rejected employee to transformational leader. But the true satisfaction came in what followed the ceremony, during the reception that gathered representatives from every phase of our evolution. Daniel approached with his daughter Layla, now leading our next-generation technology division. "Remember when we worked in that basement storage room?" he asked with quiet amusement. "Richard called our personalization engine unnecessarily complicated and irrelevant to audience needs. And now it's the cornerstone of our global platform," I acknowledged, "serving over 200 million users daily." "The technology was always viable," Layla observed. "What changed was the organizational framework around it, from suppression to activation." That insight captured the essence of our transformation. Approach, not replacing valuable components, but releasing their potential through deliberate cultural evolution. Throughout the evening, similar themes emerged in conversations with team members at every level. Stories of capabilities finally expressed, ideas finally implemented, contributions finally recognized. My father joined me as the reception concluded, looking more fulfilled than I had ever witnessed during his decades under Richard's leadership. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said quietly, "not just of the company's success, but of how you achieved it, by returning to his original vision, while extending it into domains he couldn't have imagined." His philosophy always emphasized evolution, I reflected. Not preservation for tradition's sake, but continuous adaptation guided by core values. "Richard never understood that distinction," my father acknowledged. "He mistook stability for strength, control for leadership." "And you?" I asked, curious about his perspective after years leading our creative division. "I compromised too long," he admitted. "Accepted false limitations out of loyalty to hierarchical structures rather than fundamental purpose." "But look what you've built since," I reminded him, gesturing toward the teams gathered around us. The creative renaissance his leadership had nurtured once freed from artificial constraints. Later that evening, as the reception wound down, I found myself alone in the theater's historic balcony, gazing across the venue that had witnessed our industry's evolution over a century, from silent films to digital streaming, from passive consumption to interactive engagement. The metaphor seemed particularly fitting for our transformation journey, not abandoning valuable heritage, but enhancing it with contemporary capabilities. Vanessa joined me, sliding into the adjacent seat, with characteristic directness. "Quite the triumph," she observed. "From being kicked out of Thanksgiving dinner to receiving the industry's highest honor." "The dramatic moment makes better headlines," I acknowledged. "But the meaningful work happened in between. In all the quiet, consistent effort that transformed 3 struggling companies into something greater than any could have become independently." "That's what my next book examines," she revealed. "Not the family drama or boardroom confrontation, but the integration framework that created sustainable transformation." "Book?" I asked, surprised. She nodded. "I've been documenting our journey, not as family gossip, but as a replicable model for industry evolution. Beyond Disruption, the integration imperative in digital transformation. Publisher wants it next spring." The prospect of our approach being disseminated beyond our own organization represented another. The prospect of Vanessa's book, documenting our transformation not as family drama, but as a replicable model for industry evolution, represented yet another dimension of impact beyond our operational success. Not just building a thriving enterprise, but establishing a framework others could adapt to their own evolutionary challenges. The following morning, I found myself standing at the edge of Seattle's Elliott Bay. Dawn light shimmered across the Eye, water, illuminating ferries gliding between islands as the city gradually awakened. This quiet moment of reflection had become my ritual before significant transitions, and today marked a particularly meaningful milestone, exactly 10 years since I had founded Nexus Communications. A decade of evolution, from dismissed family member to global industry leader, from solo entrepreneur working from a converted warehouse to CEO of an international media ecosystem employing over 12,000 people across 5 continents. From rejected innovator to recognized visionary whose integration model had transformed understanding of sustainable evolution. The journey's most dramatic moments had captured headlines, certainly. The acquisition announcement, the boardroom, revelation of my identity as Elise Morgan, the Global Vision merger, the Davos keynote, the Lifetime Achievement Award. But the true transformation had occurred between those spotlight events, in the consistent, persistent work of building something valuable where others had seen only tradition to protect or authority to defend. My phone vibrated with an incoming message. Sophie, characteristically early for our scheduled meeting. At headquarters whenever you're ready. Asian Education Partnerships presentation complete. University administrators arriving at 10. The educational dimension represented our newest expansion, adapting our integration framework beyond media organizations to knowledge transmission systems. Sophie's innovation division had developed a comprehensive approach combining traditional academic expertise with digital distribution capabilities, creating personalized learning ecosystems that preserved institutional knowledge while embracing technological possibilities. When I arrived at our headquarters, I found not just Sophie, but an unexpected gathering, representatives from every phase of our 10-year evolution. Daniel Chen and his engineering team, whose basement innovations had become cornerstone technologies. My father and the creative content division, whose wavelength framework had revolutionized audience engagement. Blake and the regional partnerships team, whose collaborative approach had transformed local media ecosystems. Surprise, Sophie announced as I entered the executive level. We couldn't let the decade milestone pass without acknowledgement. The space had been transformed with interactive displays chronicling our journey, not just corporate metrics, but human transformations. Side-by-side images showed Daniel's team moving from their basement workspace to leading our global technology division. Visual timelines tracked my father's wavelength concept from rejection under Richard's leadership to industry-standard platform under our integration model. Before and after perspectives captured Blake's evolution from Richard's ineffective imitator to authentic collaborative leader. This isn't about celebrating financial results, Sophie explained, but evolutionary philosophy. Not what we built, but how we built it. Through integration rather than replacement, collaboration rather than conformity. As I moved through the displays, each captured a dimension of our transformation approach. The deliberate balance between preserving valuable tradition and embracing necessary evolution. The cultural framework that elevated contribution over hierarchy, the distributed leadership model that replaced concentrated control with collaborative innovation. The university administrators are here to learn this philosophy, Sophie continued, not just implement our educational technology. They're struggling with the same false dichotomies we addressed in media, tradition versus innovation, institutional expertise versus technological capabilities, established credibility versus emerging possibilities. Our meeting with the international education delegation that followed demonstrated exactly how our integration model transcended industry boundaries. University leaders from across Asia described challenges remarkably similar to those we had addressed in media transformation. Valuable institutional knowledge trapped in outdated distribution systems, innovative technological approaches lacking, established credibility, false choices between preserving tradition and embracing evolution. Your framework resolves these artificial oppositions, noted Dr. Takahashi from Tokyo University. Not tradition or innovation, but tradition evolving through innovation. Not institutional expertise or technological capabilities, but expertise, amplified through technology. The philosophy matters more than specific implementations, I explained. Technical systems can be replicated. Cultural frameworks that integrate diverse strengths create sustainable advantage no competitor can easily duplicate. As the delegation toured our operations, observing cross-functional teams collaborating across previously separate domains, technological innovations implemented within established content frameworks, diverse leadership approaches united by shared purpose, I realized how profoundly our model had matured beyond its origins. What had begun as my personal response to family dismissal had evolved into a comprehensive transformation philosophy, applicable across industries and cultures. The integration framework we had pioneered wasn't just about media companies, but about any organization navigating evolutionary challenges, balancing valuable heritage with necessary advancement, preserving essential strengths while addressing fundamental limitations. That evening, as the educational delegation departed with implementation frameworks for their institutions, I found myself reflecting on this expanded impact with Marcus in my office. "We've moved beyond media transformation," he observed. "The model works for any organization facing evolutionary challenges, balancing established value with emerging possibilities. That's because the underlying principles transcend specific industries," I replied. "Integration rather than replacement. Collaborative diversity rather than imposed uniformity. Distributed contribution rather than concentrated control." "Which raises an interesting question," Marcus said thoughtfully. "Your keynote at the industry summit next month. What if we position it not as media evolution, but as comprehensive transformation philosophy? Not just how we transformed Morgan Media, Nexus, and Global Vision, but how any organization can evolve through integration rather than disruption." The suggestion reflected exactly how our approach had matured, from specific corporate transformation to universal evolutionary framework. The journey that had begun with my dismissal from family dinner had expanded far beyond personal vindication to philosophical approach with broad applicability. The true innovation wasn't technological but philosophical, I agreed. Recognizing that neither tradition nor disruption alone creates sustainable value. The future belongs to organizations that integrate both, preserving what remains relevant while evolving what has become outdated. The industry summit that followed a month later gathered leaders not just from media, but from across the economic spectrum. Healthcare organizations navigating technological transformation, educational institutions balancing academic tradition with digital innovation, manufacturing companies integrating automation within established expertise, financial services firms preserving institutional knowledge while embracing algorithmic capabilities. As I prepared my keynote address, I realized how profoundly our journey had transcended its origins. What had begun as my response to family dismissal had evolved into a comprehensive approach to sustainable transformation, applicable across domains and cultures. "Evolution often follows a common pattern," I began, addressing the assembled cross-industry. "Leadership. Established organizations preserve tradition at the expense of necessary advancement. Innovative disruptors embrace technological possibilities while dismissing valuable heritage. Both approaches create temporary advantage but miss sustainable opportunity." The screens behind me displayed not just our media integration model, but its application across diverse industries, healthcare systems balancing clinical expertise with technological capabilities, educational institutions preserving academic knowledge while embracing digital distribution, manufacturing operations integrating human craftsmanship with automated precision. The integration imperative transcends specific domains, I continued. Whether transforming media companies, educational institutions, healthcare systems, or manufacturing operations, sustainable evolution requires balancing valuable heritage with necessary advancement, preserving essential strengths while addressing fundamental limitations. Throughout the presentation, I emphasized the human dimension of transformation, Not just technical integration or organizational restructuring, but cultural evolution that allowed individuals to contribute their authentic strengths within collaborative frameworks. The metrics that matter aren't just financial performance or market penetration, I concluded. They're human potential unleashed, creativity amplified, and purpose aligned with contribution. That's how sustainable transformation differs from temporary disruption across every industry and organization. The response wasn't just enthusiastic engagement, but practical implementation. Leaders from diverse industries approaching our team to adapt our integration framework to their specific evolutionary challenges. Healthcare executives seeking to balance clinical expertise with technological innovation. Educational administrators navigating transitions between traditional instruction and digital distribution. Manufacturing leaders integrating craftsmanship with automation. In the months that followed, we established a dedicated transformation consultancy, Integration Partners, to support organizations implementing our evolutionary approach across industries and regions. Not as corporate acquisition targets, but as collaborative innovation partners, each adapting our framework to their specific challenges while contributing new dimensions to our understanding. Daniel led technological implementation strategies. My father developed content integration approaches. Sophie pioneered educational applications. Blake focused on regional adaptation frameworks. This distributed leadership model perfectly embodied our integration philosophy, diverse capabilities united by shared purpose rather than hierarchical control. 1 year after the industry summit, I found myself addressing the inaugural Integration Symposium, gathering transformation leaders from organizations implementing our framework across 6 continents. Not just media companies, but healthcare systems, educational institutions, manufacturing operations, financial services firms, government agencies, and nonprofit organizations. Your integration model resolved contradictions we thought were inevitable, reported Dr. Eliana Reyes, who had implemented our approach within Mexico's largest healthcare system. We had assumed we must choose between clinical tradition and technological innovation. Your framework showed us how to integrate both, preserving valuable expertise while embracing necessary advancement. The cultural dimension proved most transformative, added Professor Wei Xiaoping from Beijing University. Not just implementing technical systems, but evolving organizational frameworks that elevated contribution over conformity, collaboration over control. Throughout the symposium, similar themes emerged across diverse implementations. Organizations discovering that sustainable transformation required not choosing between tradition and innovation, but thoughtfully integrating both, not imposing uniform approaches, but leveraging complementary strengths. The integration imperative transcends cultural boundaries, observed Aditya Sharma, who had adapted our framework within India's largest manufacturing conglomerate. Whether in Seattle or Mumbai, sustainable evolution requires the same fundamental balance, preserving what remains valuable while evolving what must advance. As the symposium concluded, I found myself reflecting on this expanded impact with Marcus during a quiet moment overlooking Seattle's skyline from our headquarters rooftop garden. When you revealed yourself as E.J. Morgan in that boardroom, he noted, could you have imagined this global implementation of your integration philosophy? I smiled, remembering that dramatic moment of revelation. The boardroom confrontation was satisfying, certainly, but the meaningful impact came from what followed, not proving critics wrong, but proving a different approach right through consistent creation. And now that approach is transforming organizations across industries and continents, Marcus observed, far beyond media companies to any institution navigating evolutionary challenges. The realization perfectly captured how our journey had transcended its origins, from my personal response to family dismissal to comprehensive transformation philosophy with universal application. The integration framework we had pioneered wasn't just about balancing tradition and innovation in media companies, but about resolving false dichotomies in any organization facing evolutionary challenges. That evening, as I prepared for a rare, family gathering at my home overlooking Elliott Bay, I reflected on how profoundly our relationships had transformed alongside our professional evolution. My father had discovered renewed creative purpose leading our content division. Sophie had developed from hesitant film school graduate to confident innovation leader. Blake had evolved from Richard's ineffective imitator to authentic collaborative executive. Even Catherine had found her voice developing community engagement initiatives. The family that arrived for dinner bore little resemblance to the dismissive relatives who had ejected me from Thanksgiving years earlier. Not just in professional accomplishments, but in fundamental dynamics, the hierarchy that had suppressed authentic contribution replaced by collaborative appreciation for diverse strengths. I've been thinking about what makes our approach different, my father said as we gathered on the balcony watching sunset transform the Olympic Mountains. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.